Hello, everyone, and welcome to Stiles Solutions Live. My name is Ian McNeil. I'm a member of the Stiles University team, and I will be assisting with today's session. We're happy to have you joining us for woodWOP 7, Vertical Trimming Contours in the Z-Axis. We at Stiles know how important keeping your production up and running is to your success. Today's web session is one of the many creative ways that we are continuing our commitment to providing the highest level of service, support, and responsiveness that you've come to expect from us. Stiles University is proudly celebrating 30 years as the industry's only nationally accredited training program. Our learning events provide comprehensive hands-on technical and applications training designed to equip manufacturers with the skills and knowledge needed to thrive. We're happy to be joined today by Manny Silva, our CNC instructor with Stiles University. Manny joined Stiles in March of 2019, and in just the last year, he's quickly become a trusted CNC and woodWOP resource to customers and colleagues alike. Manny has played an active role in our digital and online learning efforts, and we're lucky to have him leading today's web session. Manny, at this time, I'll invite you to come off mute. Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me, Manny?
Yes, I can.
Oh, there we go. Okay. Well, Manny, I'm glad to have you joining us, and it's good to see a couple of our attendees returning from previous sessions, so welcome to all of you. Please know that you can submit questions for Manny via the Q&A window. If you look at your panel, you might see a Q&A logo in a chat. Please submit any questions you have for Manny throughout the course in that Q&A window, and we'll be able to address those questions at the conclusion of the session. So Manny, I see that you've taken control, and if you're ready to go ahead, you can kick us off.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Welcome, everyone. And since it's the afternoon here in Grand Rapids, good afternoon. And if you're elsewhere, good day to you. So as Ian was saying, we're going to cover vertical trimming contours in the Z-axis. And so what we're talking about is all the panels that woodWOP you create in woodWOP. The x-axis is always going to be talking about the length of the panel, and your y-axis is always talking the width of your panel. And so typically when we're first teaching the woodWOP programming and we're talking contours, we're always starting out with programming the contours at the bottom of the panel. So when we look at this being obviously the top of the panel or the top of the part that you're going to design, each individual part in woodWOP, Z is starting from the bottom of that part and going up towards the panel, the top of the panel. So that's what it's talking about in Z, or if you prefer to think of it as the bottom or the top of the spoil board or the top of the pods if you're running a pod and rail machine. So again, the Z is going to be from the bottom of your processed part and in the direction of towards the top of the part. When we first open up woodWOP, one of the things we're going to see is a screen similar to this. And in doing so, and creating a geometry for your toolpath to follow, your trimmer to follow, you're going to have to bring in contours, is what the woodWOP program calls it. And so if we look at this left side of the screen, what we'll see is this zoomed in is what we're going to look at and kind of talk about today. The other thing we'll talk about shortly towards the end of the webinar is going to be the trimmer icon here, specifically the vertical trimming. So as we look at this, in woodWOP, when we click on this icon here, which is your contours icon, you'll see all these different icons. And when we click on a specific macro, which in this case, when we go from clicking on that icon, then the first macro we have is your point. And when you're first starting out with woodWOP, the main thing you want to keep in track of and be aware of is every contour needs a point to leave from, whether you're talking a straight line of some sort or an arc of some sort, it needs a point to leave from. So the first thing you always have to do is bring in a point. Then you have two line options. Your first line option is your line endpoint. And what that's going to do is woodWOP wants to know where this line is going to end. It knows where it's leaving from because you either brought in a point before this line or you had a previous line or arc before this. So when you bring in this macro, it's going to ask you where do you want it to end, okay? The next line option that you have available to you is your line length and angle. Same thing, it wants to know where this line is going to be ending, and then what angle is it going to take in order to get to that location. Okay, so it wants to know how long this line is, and that's going to determine, based on the length of that line, is going to determine where it's going to end. Okay, so you're no longer giving it an endpoint, you're telling it how long the line needs to be, and then you're telling it what angle to take. Your four arc options that you have available to you in woodWOP is your arc radius endpoint. And the cool thing about woodWOP, at least above 5, woodWOP 5, is they give you better graphics, I would say. And so when we're looking at this, again, it's asking where is this arc going to end? So if it's leaving from here, it's going to end at this square. What is the radius of this arc? Okay. Center point. So the arc center and end point, same thing. It's leaving from this orange dot. It's going in this direction and it's going to end here. So that's going to be the end of the arc. And the center of the arc, if you remember either grade school or high school, and if you remember the tool that was called a compass, and what it had was a sharp point on one end and kind of a pencil or a pen on the other end, and you would stab your paper or put the sharp point on the paper and then rotate your pencil around, creates that arc. That's the same concept. Where is that point going to be if you were thinking of a compass? And then it follows until it gets to the other end, okay? So where do you want it to pivot around? The next one you have available to you is your arc start angle. It's also the arc end angle, and then the arc's end point. So just like the graphic is showing you here, if you're starting here, what's the angle that you want the arc to start with? And you have an option to use the end angle as well. So if you wanted to use the end angle, if you knew that one. And then where is that arc going to end? These two right here in the center, people tend to have a little bit more difficulty using if they're not familiar with using the arcs. And your arc's center point here, this one is also going to need your I or J center point. So the I being your x-axis and your J being your y-axis. Okay, and that was your arc start point, or your arc start angle and end point. And then your third option you have is your arc 3 points. So it's going to ask you right off the bat, okay, you're leaving from here, you want to end here, what's the center? What is that arc going to pass through? So then you're going to have to put an X and Y coordinate in there, so that way it knows what that arc needs to pass, and based on the midpoint and end point of that arc, it creates the arc for you. Some edit options that you have available to you in woodWOP are the round, the chamfer, and the split. So the kind of the easiest way to program, in my opinion, is if you were going to do just straight lines, 90-degree turns, or well, we'll keep it at 90-degree turns, and then you're going to go in and edit that 90-degree and create a radiused corner or a rounded corner. Okay, and so when you do that, you would pick which line you wanted to round at the end of that line, and then you would put in the radius you want that edit to have. In the chamfer macro, it's going to, there's a couple options you can choose from. You have the ability to shorten one side, shorten a second side, or tell it how long this line is going to be, or how wide this gap is going to end up being here. So same thing, if you created a design and then using the straight lines or the arcs, and then you wanted a chamfer where two lines meet, you can do so. So a lot of times you'll see this used in, say, countertops and that sort of thing. Your third edit option is your split. Now your split's going to be used if you wanted to, just like it kind of alludes to and what it sounds like, splitting a line. So you went from up here down to this corner, went over here, and then down, and decided you needed to split this line for some reason. And typically what you'll see a split for is if you wanted to start your trimmer in a different location than what you originally planned. And so you come in and you split a line and then you start your trimmer there instead of, say, a corner of a panel or something like that. And the other thing you have available to you in all these is at least the arc options and the straight line options. And the point is moving up and down in Z. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And if you're able to do it successfully, what you can end up with is something similar to these products here, which is just a raised panel door, right? And so what happened is a program was designed to mill out the center and then come back through and move over in the X and Y and move up in Z. So that way it creates these clean corners on this panel. Same concept here. Only difference is the tooling, different type of tooling was used for this door here. Okay. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to open up woodWOP and we're going to kind of walk through this, what it actually looks like when you're programming a line and an arc and moving down in Z or up in Z. So in woodWOP, normally what you'll see when you open up a program is you'll see something like this. It'll be in one of the views, right? And right now I have it in top view. And the assumption is if you're on this webinar is you're at least familiar with woodWOP and you know how to navigate some of the things that we're going to talk about today. Like example, the contours and how to put a trimmer on a contour and to change different views or open up another window view. So when I'm moving up and down in Z, what I like to do is I like to look at my panel in multiple views. So right now I have it in the top view, but I also want to look at it in the side view. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up to this icon here and I'm going to look at the new workpiece view. And now I'm going to come over and I'm going to look at it from the left side. Okay, and what this is going to do is it's going to allow me to see what the design is doing in the Z, because I'm looking at it from a side, and what it's doing as it's moving through the panel in the X and Y. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is, as the example I'm going to do today, is I'm going to bring in a point, and I'm going to start this point at 10 millimeters in the X axis. And if you see down here, here's my point, this little kind of circle right there, right? A little bullseye looking thing. And I'm going to move it 10 millimeters in the X and then 50 millimeters in the Y. So now if I go back to the top view, it's right there. And now notice on this side view here, on the left side view, my point is at the bottom of the panel because, like we talked about earlier, the Z position is currently 0. And you can see this little help graphic here. woodWOP has this little help graphic that you can turn on your woodWOP program, so in your settings, and that way you can kind of have a little example of what your cell is actually talking about. So we want to move this to the top of the panel, okay? And because my panel thickness, I created variables for my panel, and this panel is 300 millimeters in length, 300 millimeters in width, and the thickness, I created it at 50 millimeters thick. So I want to move this Z position to the top of the panel. And instead of typing in 50, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the variable of T. And what we see is when we do so, that point is now at the top of the panel. And that's exactly where we want it for right now. Okay? And so now what we want to do is I want to bring in another line, and this line, I want it to come down to here and stop about 5 millimeters off the bottom of the panel. Okay, so what I'm going to do, click on the line macro, and I'm going to use the line endpoint, and now what I want to do is I want to come in through here and tell it where to be in the X and the Y axis. So I'm going to keep this relative to where I'm leaving from, and I'm going to say don't move in the X from where you're leaving, and I want to travel 75 millimeters from that point in the Y axis. And we'll see that my line graphically, it changed, right? So initially it was showing that it was going in a different direction. That's just because of the default for that line at the time. And now notice it's still at the top of the panel. So what I need to do is I need to come into definition mode here at the very bottom and click on this plus sign. And what we get is this pop-up window. When we have this pop-up window, we have some choices to make. If we click the wrong amount or the wrong combination of checkboxes, we notice the OK sign grays out. So I can't use this combination, right? And we know that you have a line endpoint and you have a line that uses line length and angle. So we're using the line endpoint, and what we want to do is use the Z end. Your other option is your pitch and Z, and we're going to talk about why you would or wouldn't use that and kind of why to take caution when using it. The pitch and Z, that is. So right now I'm going to use Z end. Click OK, and notice this graphic comes up here. My default is to 0. The graphic here drops all the way down to 0 because that's where the line is now ending at Z0. And the top view, I don't see any difference, right? So again, this is why I want to look at two different views at the same time. So that way, instantly, I can see if something's going horribly wrong. So I want to change this to 5 millimeters in Z. So now it's 5 millimeters from the bottom of the panel. Now here's the deal. Talked about pitch and Z, right? So if we come over to here, the definition mode, and we change this to pitch and Z, and I hit OK, I need to tell it what that angle is going to be. So I want to come down in the negative direction, and I want to go down to 34.7. That's going to get me in the right direction. However, I'm not in the right spot, right? And so if I go back to here and I go into the Z end, click OK, I'm 5 millimeters up from the bottom of the panel. One thing you can do is you can come up to your view and click on contour element information. And what you can end up seeing on your program, and it's not letting me pull it up to here, but what I see in here is this angle is -34. So if I come in here to the definition mode and I change it in Z, I come back, let's change it to 34, it comes up. So the angle's right, but I still need to move it, right? So what we end up having is we have to figure out, and we could use the trigonometry to figure out what this right angle would be if we had it still at 5 millimeters. We could go in there, figure out the hypotenuse, figure out the length of this line, and figure out how far away it is, right? And that would get us the 5 millimeters. So if I put in here, let's say negative 30 degrees, okay? That puts us close, right? So if I come back over to the definition mode, click on Z end, that's getting us pretty close. Here's the deal. If I'm in negative, or if I'm at 5Z and I change the thickness of my panel, let's say I want it to be 19 millimeters thick, it still remains, notice it doesn't graphically change here in the top view, but in the side view, it still remains 5 millimeters from the bottom of the panel, still remains 5 millimeters in Z. But if I go back and I change this to the Z pitch, and we saw earlier that if it was 50 millimeters thick, we were okay. But now we changed our material thickness because we had to change the part. We're using a different design, and now our pitch is still the same, but now it's all the way through our panel. So we can see that it's going to be a bad day for our machine and our company if we play around with this in the wrong way. So that's why you want to use caution if you're using pitch and Z, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to come back over to the definition mode, change it back to Z end at 5 millimeters. We're going to change this back to 50. Okay, and what we want to do is we want to come back over and then back up to the thickness of the panel, to the top of the panel. So we're going to bring in another line. And I want to be at 0. And I'm going to move 50 millimeters in the X. I'm sorry, 50 millimeters in the Y-axis. And then what I'm going to do is just come back up, like I said. If I don't hit the definition mode, it assumes you want to remain in the same location as the previous line. Okay, so now if I click on the lined endpoint, and now I want to travel 75 millimeters, so that way it's the same distance as that first line. But again, notice it's still stuck at the bottom, 5 millimeters from the bottom. So I need to come into definition mode, come over to Z end, hit the OK, and now it asks me where do you want the line to end in Z. So I want to go back to the thickness of the panel. Okay, here we are with a contour that starts at the top of the panel, comes down to 5 millimeters, travels across the 5 millimeters from the bottom of the panel, and then it comes back up. Again, top view, we would have never noticed if we were doing it right or wrong. All we would notice is that it's just going across the panel in the Y-axis. So how do we put a trimmer on that becomes the next question. Well, if you've taken one of the online classes, the CNC 100, the 110, or any of the classes that we have in Grand Rapids or in the other Stiles locations, you'll know that there's a trimmer icon here. When we come into vertical trimming, and now instantly you get an error because there's nothing in here. Remember, you want to hit this arrow sign and tell it what contour to follow. And since it's not a closed contour, you have to tell it exactly where to end. So once we click on here and then click on the 1-3, we see that there's now a graphic that shows where the trimmer is going to be. Now, my default for this trimmer is set up at -0.2 millimeters. Okay. All the rest of this information, again, if you've taken one of the online classes or been through one of our Stiles university classes, you'll know all this other stuff. So what we want to do is we want to tell this trimmer to remain relative using the @ symbol like we have before to this contour element. So in order to do so, @ symbol and 0. So we want it to ride that line, right? And so again, graphically, we see that it's going to start here, come across, and then come back up. From the top view, we don't see it doing anything spectacular. Now, the other thing we can do is we can come into Tool Display here, and we can click on the Tool Display, and it'll give you a graphic of what that tool image is going to do, right, when you run it through your machine. So we see that the tool is going to rotate in this direction on the top view, and it's going this direction, starting here and moving in this direction here. From the side, when we hit the animation button, we'll see that it travels down, over, and back up, riding that line the entire time. So the tool display is on, and the animation is here. It looks like a little play button. And now we see it go down and back up. This toolbar or this slide bar here will control the speed, right? Okay, so usually we want it kind of slow just so we can get a better view of what it's actually doing. Okay. Now, the arcs are the same way. So if we wanted to come in and create an arc, the first thing we would need is, if we were going to do a completely different contour, is come into our contours icon, click on our point, and tell it where we want that point to be. And in this case, I'm just going to choose 25 millimeters by 25 millimeters. So 25 millimeters in the X, 25 millimeters in the Y. And again, I want it to start at the top of the panel. Now, right now, I'm going to go ahead and switch views. So that way we can see graphically better what this arc is going to do. So I'm going to choose the front view. So now I can see it, and now this one is out of the way. It's not in my way when I look at it. Okay, so now I'm going to bring in an arc, which is here. I'm going to use this first one, the arc radius endpoint. And the same thing, where do you want it to end? I want it to end 25 millimeters from the edge of the panel in the X and in the Y axis. So I'm going to go length minus 25 in the X, and I'm going to go width minus 25 in the X. And now we still have an error down here because I don't have anything for a radius. So if I come in here and I took off 25 millimeters in the X and the Y, so I'm going to use 250 for my radius because my panel is 300 by 300. And then we get a graphic that looks like this. Fine, that works. Here's the problem. I want to travel down in Z. How do I do that? Again, just like the straight lines, I'm going to come into this definition mode down here, click on the definition mode, and notice you get all these options that are pertaining to the arcs that you see on the far left. Okay, these four here. So we're going to leave all these up here the same, leave these checkboxes the same, and we're going to choose Z end. Again, because it's more forgiving if we change the panel thickness. And now I need to tell it where I want it to end in Z. So we're just going to go ahead and use 5 millimeters again. So we get this graphic here. Again, you don't see anything change in the Z if you're looking at top view. So that's why I like to choose a side view so I can see it at the same time. Now I put another tool on it, or put a tool on this one. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this. All you have to do to duplicate is right click and then come down to duplicate. Be careful, delete's right above it. Now I hit duplicate. Again, I need to go in and change the start point and end point for this trimmer. So I come in here, click on contour 2 element 0 and contour 2 element 1. Graphically, we see what it's doing because we are relative in Z to the contour we're following. Okay, remember, contour is just geometry or a tool path for your trimmer to follow. Now, if I come up here, hit the tool display, what we'll see again is the same type of graphic we saw before for the straight line. If I hit play, we see that it rides a line the entire time. Okay, if I turn it off, we see that the graphic is back. Again, if you have a hard number in here, let's say we wanted to, let's say it was at 12 millimeters in Z, then your tool will stay at 12 millimeters from the beginning to the end of that contour. So it's following the contour path, but it's not staying relative in Z to that contour. So that's a big thing to pay attention to if you're trying to change elevation or change the Z movement in a very simple program in woodWOP. Okay, so we want to stay in relative to that contour line. All right. So if we did all that and we understand all that, what we could end up doing is going back to that design that we saw before, right? That looked like this one here. And what that actually looks like if we ran it on a simulator, it would look like so. So what we did in this one to create that raised panel door is all we did was we came in with a pocket, routed it out, and this happens just to be a 1/2 inch bit. And once we got done routing out the pocket, what we do is we change the bit size to a smaller bit to get a nice tight trim on the corners, cleans it up a little bit. And now we're going to come back in with a 45 and come up and down in Z to clean out the corners even more. So we end up with the result of that raised panel door. And we can see it here in the corners, and we have that angle. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and open it up to questions for now, and we'll see if we can answer some questions that we may have. Ian, do we have any questions out there?
Oh, sorry. I think I forgot to unmute myself there. I wanted to let everyone know that you can still submit those questions via the Q&A tab at either the bottom or top of your screen. Right now, we don't have anything in, but feel free to take a couple of seconds and type that question in. Oh, Manny, it looks like we just got one already. If you want to go ahead and address Jeffrey Anderson's question.
So Jeffrey's got a question about, can you add a radius in Z with the edit function? So when we're in woodWOP here, and you're wanting to add a radius to the Z, so if I understand you, you want to make sure you're staying off of this line a certain distance. You could do that. You could say at relative to the contour line and whatever the radius is you're looking for in Z. So if our radius, you wanted to keep it off by 2 millimeters, you could do so. And notice what it does is it actually raises it 2 millimeters from that line, from that contour.
Hey, Manny, unfortunately, I think I'm sharing my screen right now, so I'm going to have you share back again just to show Jeffrey what you were doing there in woodWOP. I apologize.
Okay. So let's go ahead.
Thanks to Doug for that tip. I apologize for that, everyone. Can
All
you
right.
back on Manny's screen? There we go.
So what I did, Jeffrey, is if I was relative to the line, right? And if I understand your question about the radius in Z, if you wanted to move up a specific radius of that tool, then you could move up, and let's say you wanted to move up by 2, staying relative to that line, then you're up. And then in top view, you don't really get a different look because you can only see it in that side view. And we can see that it's up like 2 millimeters there. Mike, we have woodWOP version 5. Is it?
I can address that woodWOP 5 question real quick,
Okay.
man. Yeah, Mike, just to let you know, we're going to be doing a very similar webinar to what we just watched, but with woodWOP 5 software on May 4th. That's a Monday. So all the features that you saw Manny working on, we can do some of those with similar functionality in woodWOP 5. So you want to go to stiles.live and scroll down so you see the session for May 4th. Again, it's a Monday, and we'll be doing a lot of the similar functionality here, but with woodWOP 5. So if you want to come back to us on that date, you can sit through that. Otherwise, feel free to send Manny a direct email and he can give you a few more solutions for woodWOP 5 there.
Thanks, Ian.
Sure.
And so
I
Steve,
see, before you get to Stevens, you want to just see if Jeffrey, if that's a follow-up to what you were discussing before there, Manny?
are you talking about Mr. Anderson?
Yeah. I
Okay.
apologize. I don't know if that's related to your, I don't think it's related to the radius question. I didn't mean to skip over Steven there.
So you're looking to add a radius at the end of your ramp. So in the first example, so let's do this. I'm going to turn that trimmer off so we can just see this one. And we're going to go back to our first contour. Look at it from the left view. And you want to add a radius here. So if we're going to add a radius there, what we can do is come in and find the edit. And then come in and radius that edge. But probably the better way of doing it is going to bring in an actual arc in order to get in there. So for this tool, it's at, this tool was what, a 1/2 inch cutter. So yeah, I would come in instead of using the radius or the round, add an arc in there and then tell it what the arc needs to be. So wherever I want it to end, and then put it in so. So in this case, it started there, ended at 75, and this one ended at 50. So if I came in here and I wanted to say that I'm going to stay at 0 in the X, let's say I want to move over by 5 millimeters in the Y, and then I want to come into Z, and I want to tell it where to be in Z, so that would be 5 millimeters, and then the radius would end up being 5, and I'd have to come over here and change this to 75, change this to 10. You would have to end up playing with it in order to make it work. So right now I have a small radius, but I'm going to have to adjust some other parameters in here.
Yeah, Jeffrey, if we can take that conversation offline and we can have Manny contact you directly, please let us know. Manny's email is msilva@stilesmachinery.com. If you have some specific questions related to radiuses and ramps, we can handle those in an email conversation or even in a one-on-one webinar if that'll be easier for you. So feel free to reach out to us there. Manny, I just wondering if you can, Steve Young here is asking if you can show again how you get both the top view and other views at the same time. Can you show how you did that?
Yeah, so we're in this view here, right? And so what I'm going to do is come in to this section here in your woodWOP, and you have this button here, it says New Workpiece View. If you click on that, you end up with your new workpiece view. And now for this window here, I have these icons. So I can change it to whatever I want it to do. In this case, I want to use top view. And in this one, I can come over here to this window, and it has its own set of views, icons here, and then just pick the view that you want to see. So that will take care of that, the different views. And you can, depending on what settings you have in your woodWOP, you can come over and even open up another view if you wanted to. Depending on how many views you have in your settings in woodWOP will determine how many you're allowed to open. So if you can't open any at all, go into your extras and then into your settings, and then in there we'll have a button you can check and put in 2 views, 3 views, or whatever you need. Now that we're in 3 different views, at least on my screen, if I wanted to go back to only seeing 2 views, I come up to here and I close workpiece view, and it closes it in reverse order. So I see, Stephen, you have a question about demonstrating the split command. So the split command, what I'll do is I'll just go ahead and create another contour and run it across this bottom here, okay? And so I'll open up another one, and I'm gonna run it at 0 and 0, the start point. It's gonna be 0 and 0, and I'm gonna just run it at the bottom of the panel for now, okay? So now here it is at the very bottom. It's at 0, 0 on the X and the Y. I'll bring in a line, and let's say I wanna go down to this edge here. So I wanna go the length of the panel, and I wanna stay 0 in the Y axis. If I wanted to bring in another line, and then I wanted to come up to here, this edge here, and come over in the Y axis, just go all the way to W, because the W is a variable for my width of the panel. And if I wanted to split this line here, instead of starting here, I wanted to start here. I can come down to this split macro right here, click on the split command, and now I have a couple different options I can use. Usually your X and Y coordinate is going to be, or axis is going to be the easiest to use. And then the other two, or the third one you have is your Z position to use, or clearance from predecessor point, or clearance from a design point. What we're going to use in this example is the split in the X axis. And now it's going to ask you, okay, well, where do you want it to be in the X axis? And in this case, I want it to be half the length of the panel. So I'm going to use L divided by 2, because the L is the variable for length in my program. If you're not using L, let's say you're using a different variable, that's fine. Or you're using just whatever numbers are in the workpiece parameters, that's fine as well. You can type in hard numbers if you wanted to. Notice one of the things I get, and what you saw in some of the other ones, is this orange triangle. If I hover over it, it tells me that half the length is 300. In this case is 150. So the same result if I just typed in 150. Now this star, or this little asterisk, is now my split. So originally, if I went in here and I brought in a trimmer, and I originally had it at the start point, and then I had it at the end point, this is what I get, right? But now I need to move this to where the trimmer starts here, at this point here. What I can do is I go back to my trimmer, make sure I'm on the correct trimmer by verifying where that green pencil's at. Okay, so if I'm up here, green pencil's there, and then I click here, I think I'm on the right one, I'm not. Make sure that pencil always moves. So you have to double click and make sure, verify that that pencil moves. So now I come down to this start point, and I tell it I want to start here at that line, or that split. There's 2 ways I can do it. I can tell it start at the end of this, which ends up being the beginning of the split, or I can come down here and click here. So when I click there, start at the end of this line, well, the line was split. So that's where it starts there, at that split. And then it continues on from the split over to the finished line.
Thanks, Manny. I just want to have one more question here from Jeffrey. Is wondering if you can just remind us how you got that panel, the helpful panel, to show up.
This one here. So this help graphic, if that's what you're talking about, this is also in your settings. And if you go over, actually, if you go over to view and you have this drop-down menu, the drop-down menu has this help graphic here. If I check this or uncheck it, my help graphic goes away. If I go back to view and click the help graphic again, it pops up. You may get it to where it looks like mine, where you can barely see it. What you can do is, just like an Excel document, you can make sure that you have these little double bars with the arrow, left click, and then drag it to whatever size you want.
Great, thanks, Manny. I'm gonna take over sharing one more time. And just to let Jason Cross know, your question we can address via email. It might just be easier for us to call you directly with that question there, just so we can bring this one to a conclusion. So Jason, please feel free to reach out. You can contact Manny. His email is on the screen now, msilva@stilesmachinery.com. And just a couple of notes before we end today's session. If you would like a more personalized version of today's webinar, Manny is available for one-on-one web sessions where your questions, applications, equipment, and products are the sole focus. It's a great way to get Manny's expertise and apply it directly to what you're working on. You can contact us at classes@stilesmachinery.com for more opportunities on that level. We also have a number of recorded woodWOP sessions available with our new web-based learning platform, Stiles University Online. You might have heard of Manny refer to CNC 100 or CNC 110. Those are our online courses that are ready and available for you right now at Stiles University Online. To get there, just visit www.stilesuniversity.com/SUO. We're currently offering a free 7-day trial. So if you go and sign up for that service today, you'll get a chance to explore it for a week and hopefully give you more opportunities in there that you can extend and continue as we continue to add information to that site. Again, if you're a woodWOP 5 user, join us back here with Stiles Solutions Live on Monday, May 4th. We'll be able to go over similar functionality with contour trimming in woodWOP 5. Thank you all for attending today. We appreciate the questions. Manny, thank you very much for guiding us through today. For those of you that are attending, please know that this session has been recorded and will be available to view at a later date using the Stiles Solutions Live Download Center. You can access that recording, other recorded sessions, and you can enroll in that May 4th session or anything else that looks interesting to you by visiting stiles.live. Again, just enter into your search platform stiles.live and it'll take you